Dangerous nuclear escalation by Vladimir Putin over European skies coming to light now. Sweden has revealed that earlier this month, Russian bombers armed with nuclear warheads entered European Union airspace before being intercepted by Swedish fighter jets. Swedish media reports 4 of Vladimir Putin's Sukhoi warplanes swooped in over the Baltic towards the island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea. 2 of the bombers were identified as Russian Su-24s, which were found to be carrying nuclear warheads. They were escorted by 2 jets, possibly Sukhoi 27s. The bombers, as seen in the images with the single stabilizer tail, were the ones armed with nukes as per Swedish claims and European and Australian media reports. The 4 Russian jets were intercepted by 2 Swedish Jas-39 Gripen aircraft, which forced them to turn back. Russia's move is being seen as an intimidation tactic to arm twist Sweden after it pledged military aid and anti-tank weapons for Ukraine. Going across now to Gaurav Sawant, who brings us special broadcast from Ukrainian capital on how Russian nuclear threat looms amid the Ukraine war.
Hello and welcome to an India Today special broadcast from War Zone Kyiv. I'm Gaurav Sawant. As this conflict enters its 2nd month, the world is on tenterhooks. Is the Russian President Vladimir Putin actually threatening the world with a nuclear strike? Is the world looking at a nuclear Armageddon? Once again, there is cold sweat, not just here in Ukraine, but across the North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries. The nuclear strategic forces, the defense forces of Russia, they've carried out an exercise. What is the signal? Is the world looking at a nuclear strike? Even if it's a tactical nuclear strike, it's a very scary thought. Over the course of the next half hour, we get you details of this nuclear blackmail.
As Ukraine's devastation piles up, an unthinkable cloud looms large. Russia places nukes on high alert. Putin triggers global nuclear fears. Nervous NATO nuclear powers on edge. 77 years after the only ever nuclear attack in the world. Nuclear nerves grip the globe again. Muscle flexing, or is there a real nuclear threat? Is a nuclear war a possibility at all? The nuclear ghost rises again.
Back-to-back nuclear threats issued by Russia, not just by their foreign office, but even President Putin. He witnessed an exercise. There are weapons that are being brandished. There are threats that are being issued. Is this just a cold warning to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries not to interfere in Russia's war with Ukraine? And should they do that? Is there an apprehension that there could be a tactical nuclear strike that could actually happen on ground? Cold sweat across this region. Russia's words cannot be taken lightly.
An unending invasion war. Weeks of savage battle, countless deaths, cities in complete ruin. But no massive win to show on the ground for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Amidst the fierce fight back by Ukraine and biting Western sanctions, ominous signs for the world have emerged. Putin has resorted to the Brahmastra in his arsenal, the massive Russian stockpile of nuclear weapons, openly threatening a no-holds-barred nuclear war, refusing to rule out the use of nuclear weapons if there is an existential threat to Russia. Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov had earlier warned that any third world war would be nuclear and destructive. A threat repeated by the Kremlin with chilling resonance.
The outcome of the operation, of course, is not a reason for usage of a nuclear weapon. We have a security concept that very clearly states that only when there is a threat for existence of the state in our country, we can use and we will actually use nuclear weapons to eliminate the threat for the existence of our country.
Let me assure you, a responsible member of the international community committed to its obligations to non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Russia is taking every possible measure to prevent Ukraine from getting nuclear weapons and respective technologies.
The nuclear saber rattling is one of many that Russia has openly indulged in. Just days into the Ukraine invasion, Vladimir Putin had put nuclear deterrent forces on high alert as a chilling warning to NATO and the West.
Dear colleagues, as you can see, not only Western countries take unfriendly measures against our country. In the economic dimension, I mean the illegal sanctions that everyone knows about very well. But the top officials of leading NATO countries allow themselves to make aggressive statements with regard to our country. That is why I ordered Defense Minister and Chief of General Staff to put Russian Army deterrence forces on high alert.
It has now emerged that Russia had even dispatched its nuclear ballistic missile submarines into the North Atlantic as the war raged in Ukraine. After their deterrent patrol, the submarines were quietly pulled back by the Kremlin. The West fears that Russia, suffering massive reverses in Ukraine's war theatre, could resort to using tactical nuclear weapons, which are of a small yield but can devastate an entire city. In a bid to escalate the war and force Ukraine to agree to its terms on the negotiations table.
Allies agreed to supply equipment to help Ukraine protect against chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear threats. This could include detection equipment, protection and medical support, as well as training for decontamination and crisis management. We are also enhancing allies' preparedness and readiness for chemical and biological and nuclear threats.
A calculated nuclear gambit or plain brinkmanship to turn the tide in a war that has simply not gone Russia's way as expected. Whatever it may be, the Ukraine war triggering nuclear moves comes as a massive alarm bell for the entire world.
Russia has the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons. Russia also has the triad of delivery: air, sea, land and underwater. And this is why the world is extremely nervous at this point of time. When the threat comes from the Russian President Vladimir Putin, when the world knows that that threat can be carried out. The world has already seen what happened in the Second World War at Hiroshima and at Nagasaki. And is that the reason why the North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries are waiting and watching, and NATO is not interfering directly in this war between Russia and Ukraine? Because that nuclear threat could well be real.
Debris, devastation, damage. The Ukraine war an image of the brute power of modern militaries. But nothing comes close to the kind of doom that would become real if the threats being thrown about by the powers at play come to life. With Putin putting the world on nuclear notice by placing his strategic arsenal on war alert, you may be wondering about the strength of the world's nuclear weapons arsenal. You may not know this, but Vladimir Putin currently controls the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons. Russia, during this crisis, has made not one, not two, but 3 nuclear threats. They've even operationalized and put on high alert their nuclear arsenal. Here's a look at the number of nuclear warheads that each country is known to have just now, because it's all about the numbers. Russia is the country with the largest nuclear arsenal, with over 6,200 nuclear warheads at this point of time. The United States has just a few, somewhat fewer warheads, no less powerful, at 5,550. And then there's China, which has 350 nuclear weapons at this time. For comparison, the only other two NATO countries in Europe that have nuclear weapons are, of course, France, which has 290. You've got UK, which has 225. Pakistan has 164. Remember, in the nuclear world, these numbers are enough to destroy the world many times over. India has 156 nuclear weapons. Israel has about 90. North Korea, we think, has between 40 and 50 nuclear weapons. Each of the nuclear powers also have formidable delivery systems to deliver their weapons of mass destruction. Starting with the most secretive and stealthy platforms, nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, some of which Russia had sailed into the North Atlantic at the beginning of this invasion of Ukraine. So starting with the Russian nuclear ballistic missile submarines, like we said, is the Bore class of submarine. There are 10 that are supposed to be in service, and their main weapon is the Bulava intercontinental submarine-launched ballistic missile. The Bore class is the mainstay. Moving on to the United States, they have a fleet of 14 Ohio-class SSBMs, or ballistic missile nuclear-powered submarines. The Trident ICBM is the primary nuclear weapon on those submarines. Then you've got China, which has a fleet of 6 Jin-class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, which have the Julang-2 missile, which is their major primary deterrent weapon. Moving on to France, it has the Triomphant class, a fleet of 4 such submarines, nuclear ballistic missile submarines, where they've got their own weapon system on board those as well. Those also go out on strategic deterrent patrols. Moving on to India, of course, we've got 2 Arihant class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. The Agni series of missiles and their derivatives, the K-15 and the K-4 missiles, are our nuclear-capable submarine-launched missiles on that particular submarine. And finally, the United Kingdom has the Vanguard class, a fleet of 4 nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, where the US-built Trident missiles are the primary nuclear weapon on board those submarines. So many, many nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines already in the world. Nuclear powers also have land-launched ballistic missiles designed for intercontinental range nuclear delivery. Russia depends on its arsenal of Topol-M long-range ballistic missiles designed for nuclear strike out to ranges of 11,000 kilometers. The US has Minuteman III ballistic missiles capable of delivering nuclear warheads out to 13,000 kilometers. China's Dongfeng series of ballistic missiles have large ranges to deliver nuclear warheads, including the Dongfeng 31, capable of nuclear strike out to over 11,000 kilometers. And remember, the land leg of India's own nuclear command has the Agni 5 missile, capable of carrying out a nuclear attack out to 5,500 kilometers or more. All of these long-range missile systems are operational and ready to be deployed at short notice. And in response to Russia's nuclear signaling, are in fact on reciprocal high alert. And apart from land and sea, there's always the aerial option for nuclear bombing. very much like the first and only nuclear attack over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. The aerial option exists to this day with nuclear powers. Russia, which has been using the Kinzhal air-launched ballistic missile in Ukraine, has been fitting them with non-nuclear warheads. But the missile is capable of nuclear strike as well, and is part of Russia's strategic arsenal, with the missile deployable from MiG-31 fighters as well as Tu-22 bombers. The United States' nuclear air delivery platforms include the world's first stealth bomber, the B-2 Spirit, an enigmatic airplane capable of penetrating highly contested airspace for strategic bombing, and the monster B-52 Stratofortress, an 8-engined behemoth that's seen half a century of nuclear readiness. What we're telling you is that the world has enough nuclear weapons and delivery systems to doom us into non-existence in a flash of a second. Weapons that were developed during the Second World War and then proliferated as a method to keep the post-war peace. While they haven't stopped wars and destruction, they've certainly ensured there hasn't been another nuclear exchange after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But with the world's biggest powers turning up the nuclear heat, it's only natural that the world is on edge. Bureau Report, India Today.
Nuclear weapons have been used only once in the history of mankind. After the Pearl Harbor debacle, United States used nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But here, in 2022, when President Putin hasn't been able to achieve his aim in Ukraine, yes, they've got Donbass region, but they haven't been able to either ensure a regime change in Kiev or demilitarize this nation. Will desperation make President Putin use a tactical nuclear strike? Or is this just a threat to ensure that nuclear powers or North Atlantic Treaty powers, they don't get involved in this battle? What happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki 77 years ago? The world still shivers at the thought of the use of nuclear weapons. We bring you this report.
Within days of the start of the invasion, the Russian army had taken control of the decommissioned nuclear power plant at Chernobyl, Ukraine. War had reached Chernobyl, the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster ever. Alarm bells began to go off because there was fear of nuclear contamination. Because even decommissioned nuclear power plants house dangerous radioactive material. The fears kept mounting. On 4th of March, Ukraine announced that one of the reactors at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant had taken a direct hit from a Russian strike, and that a reactor was on fire. The worst fears of a nuclear fallout of the war was becoming increasingly real, especially because of the sword hanging over the neck of the world. On 28th of February, Vladimir Putin had ordered Russia's military to put its nuclear weapons on special alert. He told his defense chiefs that this was because of aggressive statements by the West.
Всем понятно, что Третья мировая может быть только ядерной. Но обращаю ваше внимание, что это в голове западных политиков.
A point that no one can forget is that Russia has the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons, even more than the USA, the only country that had ever used it in war.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold, and the end is not yet. With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction to supplement the growing power of our armed forces. In their present form, these bombs are now in production, and even more powerful forms are in development. It is an atomic bomb.
On 6th of August 1945, the United States of America had dropped an atom bomb on Hiroshima. 80,000 people were killed by the blast and the firestorm that followed. Another 70,000 were injured. The bomb had been dropped to force Japan to end the World War in the East. But Japan did not surrender. 3 days later, it was the turn of Nagasaki. 40,000 people killed, 60,000 injured. Within a gap of 3 days, 120,000 Japanese had been obliterated from the face of the earth to force Japan out of the war. On 12th of August 1945, Japan finally surrendered. But Hiroshima and Nagasaki stood witness to the horrors that nuclear detonation can unleash. Not just in immediate deaths, but the festering radioactive fallout that can last decades, over generations. Children born disfigured, rampant prevalence of cancer and pain of those who survived the actual bombing. The survivors who had lived through a nuclear bomb.
Російські війська атакували Запорізьку атомну станцію, найбільшу в Європі. Вона одна могла бути як 6 Чорнобилів. Російські танкісти знали, що вони обстрілюють. Прямою наводкою по станції – це терор небаченого рівня.
In 1994, when Ukraine had voted independence from the disintegrating Soviet Union, it had the third biggest pile of nuclear weaponry in the world, its share of the nuclear arsenal of USSR. Ukraine had given up its entire stockpile for the sake of peace. Washington and Moscow stood guarantors to Ukraine's peace, signaling that that country would never need such weapons.
We have a concept of domestic security. And, well, it's public. You can read all the reasons for nuclear arms to be used. So if it is an existential threat for our country, then it can be used in accordance with our concept.
36 years later, the fear of a nuclear war in Eastern Europe is cause for concern for everybody. With Russian economy hurting from severe Western sanctions, with the battle plans having to be redrawn, with the invasion having bogged down,